look at places as investments for our collective future, our collective health, our collective well-being and progress and growth as a society.
Absolutely. And you think about those things, people, society, human beings, if they're healthy and in those places are going to thrive. And so your investments are going to perform.
Hello and welcome to Talking Place, the podcast bringing placemakers and storytellers together to talk about place. I'm your host, Tanisha Raffiuddin. I am the founder of Concept Culture, a creative agency in London, passionate about creating purposeful brands and telling powerful stories. In this episode, it is my absolute pleasure to talk place with Frances Heeney, who is affectionately known as Franny. Franny is the Director of Product Development at Principal Asset Management, where she leads global product development and capital raising initiatives. Franny has a wealth of experience in business development, client relations, and real estate assets, and has worked across the EMEA, Americas, and APAC regions as a skilled communicator and connector. Franny is here to share her personal experience and insights about place and finance. The views expressed here on the podcast are hers and hers alone. We cover a lot of ground in this episode around how investment finance can be aligned with the needs of the community, why we have an affordable housing crisis, and how places should be treated as investments for our collective future. So please do stick around till the end. All right, let's talk place.
Welcome to Talking Place podcast, where we bring placemakers and storytellers together to talk about place. So, Franny, you and I have known each other for some time now through the LA and London chapter. But for those out there who may not know who you are, tell us a little bit about what you do, how you found yourself in the built environment sector.
Absolutely. I always say it came by what I'm doing now, honestly, though it feels like I've come a long way since I started. So I started out kind of with this idealistic view of the world, wanting to be an architect, wanting to be an urban planner, had some great advice that quickly pivoted me into real estate, finance, and today I work in investment management for Principal Asset Management, which is a global company working in Europe, but on a global team doing product development, which is creating investment products for institutional investors. So it does seem like a long way from architecture and urban planning, but we're still investing into real estate, into property, into the built environment. So I like to think that I'm still tied to that.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, architecture, urban planning, these things just never leave you. They haunt you for the rest of your life. This podcast is about placemaking and storytelling. Yeah. So I'd like to start fundamentally. What does place mean to you? What in your view makes a good place?
And I'll tell you my view, and I'll tell you my view from my corporate hat. Though I will say I'm speaking on my own opinions on this and not my company. But to me, a place personally is a place of feeling, a place where you emote, a place where you have experiences and you make memories. That sounds really corny, but you don't fall in love with a shopping mall. You fall in love with the idea of being 15 and in a shopping mall with, $20 and trying to figure out what you can get. That's what I think about of places, and that's in my mind the most unappealing place, and I still have a fond memory of it. So that's what I would really go back to. From a corporate perspective, from what I'm doing today, I think about places as investments, as opportunities to hold an asset similar to how people talk about stocks and bonds, how they're investing in your own property, your own real estate. You invest in your time, in your health, in everything that you can possibly do. Property and places are a huge investment sector. And so investing in it, investing in the right things is how I think about place in that sense. Does that make any sense to you?
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. And actually, as you were speaking, I was like, that really flipped it a little bit for me, because for a lot of us, the creative side of the built environment, me being a recovering architect, I always found it hard to digest the investment side, financial side, like what is the financial return of a place? Why are we doing what we're doing? The way you spelled it out actually makes a lot of sense. Like we have to look at places as investments for our collective future, our collective health, our collective well-being and progress and growth as a society.
Absolutely. And you think about those things, people, society, human beings, if they're healthy and in those places are going to thrive. And so your investments are going to perform. If you've got a building that nobody wants to be in and it's in the middle of nowhere and all of these kind of negative attributes about it, you haven't invested in it that way, then also your overall investment holding, the numbers are probably going to reflect that. Which sounds like a funny way of starting to draw these parallels from the Excel world that I often live in to the architects, the planning, the design world. But it is there.
I love that. I think more people need to view real estate assets from that perspective as investments in public growth, public well-being, and public health. And like you said, it's for our collective future. You're right. I mean, people are happy. They perform well, and they're better at their jobs. They're making more money. They're spending more. They're enjoying themselves. So it all starts from that good place, and the people in your world who help enable the creation of those spaces are very much critical. They're very much a critical equation to placemaking.
If you don't even mind, I can take a step back. So my role is an investment manager, and so I've got clients, investors, as I would call them, at the institutional level that they trust me and my company with their capital to invest in real estate on their behalf. They are also thinking about place, and they're thinking about it. So they're going to come to me, these clients, these investors, think about public pension plans and insurance firms, major banks, that type of entity, which we think is so financed and so far from real estate. They have a vision of what they want their real estate holdings to be. And real estate makes up a big amount of their overall investment portfolio. Average an institutional investor has 11% of their portfolio investing into real estate globally, but they're not going to invest in anything. So for a long time, there's the traditional asset classes that we think about, office, retail, industrial, that they've been investing in for decades and decades. But over the last 10 years, the concept of ESG and sustainability has come up. Along with that, there's been all these new sectors that are emerging, which we all know across the built environment. But all of those things are coming together. So when the money, the capital at the top of the stream is thinking about how they want to invest in real estate before they're even hitting me and the layer that I'm at, which is a couple above where kind of architects are, for context, as we watch the money flow downstream, they're saying at the top, it's got to be a really sustainable investment, a thoughtful investment, a social investment, because they know we can quantify that strong investments that have good environmental, social, and governance perspectives also have good performance. And that's what they want from their portfolio. And that's the interesting kind of change in the industry that we've seen the last 10 years. And so starting to wrap all this together is really kind of that package. And people have been slow sometimes. Some regions of the world are quicker to get on board with it than others. And Europe has definitely been leading the way in recognizing that strong social, environmental investments are also going to be strong performing investment assets.
Oh my God, I think you just nailed the podcast right there. There's a lot to unpack, which I'd like to do layer by layer. But before we move into that, on a personal level, now we've talked about, places being, an emotion, a feeling, and places where we make memories. On a personal level,
yeah,
what is your favorite place and why?
Such a hard question. Obviously my accent, you can tell I'm not from here, and I know you travel more than pretty much anybody I know, but I'm pretty lucky to have moved around and traveled a lot too. So I'm from Canada originally, lived in Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa. I also spent some time living in Singapore, and now I'm living in London. And I've been lucky to spend a good chunk of time in New York over the years too. So I have memories in every place, in so many different ways. But my my favorite memory, or I'd say a fundamental place memory, is a very broad stroke answer here. But when I was living in Singapore, I was studying back still when I thought I might be an urban planner. But it was great. I was studying Southeast Asian geographies and urban planning. And I was sitting in a classroom looking at, all of these case studies on the page, on the screen, chatting with my peers. But then I was like such that student where, I had 4 days off for the weekend because I put all my classes over 3 days or whatever I could get away with. And I'd take off and I'd fly to wherever it was around Southeast Asia and go and spend time in those places. And I just remember spending a good chunk of time in Hanoi, having been studying traffic patterns. and you kind of go like, yeah, you can watch some videos, you can take a look at pictures, but to walk out across a massive intersection with 0 cross lights, what felt like hundreds of mopeds coming in every direction, and to watch the almost beautiful dance of the city just morph around you was such an interesting moment of place that was so tangible in a way that I hadn't experienced it, couldn't fathom in the kind of school setting. And then you're in it and you're like, this works. They don't need to fix this. This system, a piece of beauty. So I'd say that's it for me.
Oh my God, that takes me back to Hanoi and my exact experience crossing the street every time in Hanoi. I was like, I don't need to bother. They will not hit me. You're untouchable. And it's kind of this magical, unspoken rule that a pedestrian will never get hit. So you can just walk at whatever you're doing and the mopeds will just go around you.
Okay.
But it's not for the faint-hearted though. But exactly as you say, a lot of large Asian metropolitan cities, that's how traffic works. Yeah. Most people who are traveling there for the first time, the mind boggles as to how it works. But I think everyone within that system just knows the lay of the land. They know the rules of the road, as it were, and it works. There's just something just magical about watching I call it organized chaos. That there is this chaotic to the outsider, but when you look closely, there is organized. Oh gosh, I want to go back to Hanoi. Let's go back to Vietnam. So let's do it. All right. Okay. Now back to real estate. Back to asset management. So your intro, you mentioned that you're the director of product development here at Principal Asset Management. For those who may not be familiar with asset management as a term, could you break it down for us?
Totally. And asset management is a really frustrating term because it means a bunch of different things in a bunch of different contexts. So I'll explain how I think about it, and I think about it with 2 separate definitions that we use interchangeably because every industry has these things. Asset management, when you think of it fundamentally, once you have an asset, how are you managing it? Property management falls under asset management, but also within your portfolio, how does it work together? Do you have tenants in place? Is the building itself being kept up? All of that is asset management. Are you improving the buildings? Are you putting CapEx into it in terms of renovations, capital expenditures? Sorry, I'm trying not to use terminology here. Are you refitting out the entire place? Technically, the term asset management covers all of that. That's really confusing because my company has Principal Asset Management because we invest in a whole bunch of different industries across 17 different investment boutiques, real estate being one of it. So we cover all of those assets. So all of a sudden we've used the same term that we use in real estate at a higher level. An easier way for me to talk about it from my firm perspective and from what I do as my day job to say is I'd say I'm an investment management. Individuals give me their investments and I help manage their investments overall. Part of that management is asset management, but then also it's at that higher level, thinking about the portfolio and the portfolio management side of it too, which under the technical term asset management wouldn't be covered. So it's one of those kind of, you can't get a naming of a company right, especially when we use the same terms for 5 things. So that's how I would very quickly, if I say I am an investment management, that's what I'd say my industry is.
Well, thank you for that breakdown of asset management and investment management. These terms are interchangeable, and like you said, it means different things for different people. But moving away from the definition, in your view, what is the role of asset management or investment management in shaping the built environment, not just from an asset and built in bricks and mortars perspective, but creating those meaningful places and spaces where communities can create their memories.
Yeah. But I think, again, we go back to what our clients want, and thinking about what assets, what buildings, what real estate they want to invest in. And what they want to invest in is broad. I mean, there's so many reasons why we make investment decisions, but you'll also see trends happening in sectors, in industries, and in investment portfolios. So all of a sudden, think about today, think of the last 5 years. Not many investors are buying a shopping mall. Shopping malls have been on the out, right? And retail performance has been going down. The rise of e-commerce has been going up. So what we've seen is investors, institutional, really, really thoughtful individuals are going, no, we're not going to put our capital into shopping malls, as an example. That's not a hard stop. There's always an exception to the rule. Similarly, have you been to a shopping mall recently? They're not the same thing that they were maybe in the early 2000s, where they were a hub where people went. They were a community space. I'm obviously North American, so I have a very particular memory of shopping malls. But the stores that were going into a shopping mall were where you wanted to shop. It was also a gathering place. It was a community space. It was, as a Canadian, an indoor sanctuary in the winter, and all of that happens driven by the financial performance of an asset. So if people are going to them, they're shopping at those locations, and they're putting their money into it, then those assets are then performing and the owner is benefiting. When structural changes happen in societies, like we're seeing this rise of e-commerce, you could shop at home, there is a trickle-down effect. So that's a really clear example of a shift in that money in that space. Where is it going now? This is a really interesting story, and what I get excited about my job and how I think about it is, we know investors haven't stopped investing in real estate. They've just changed what sector they're focusing on. So in the last 5-10 years, the sector that's seen a boom of capital going into it, the values of those assets have gone up exponentially, is logistics and industrial assets. And that's really interesting because we don't think of those as community spaces and places in the same way, but they're still places that people go to work. They're still really, really important for fundamentally a lot of, our global population, in terms of a way a lot of people make their incomes. And all of a sudden, there's demand for people to work in logistics places. And so now, what I think is really lovely and exciting is watching how developers are thinking about logistics assets and how investors are. Instead of being kind of these dirty, gritty places, we're starting to see development sites where there's tennis courts and there's walking paths around them, because they have to attract people to work in these spaces. And there's competition because there's another shed down the road that's also looking for someone to work at them. So we're creating places in a different way, and we've seen that shift in capital. And a lot of that comes from this higher level of, what are the investors looking to? What's driving it? Those underlying demographics, and all of these slowly tying together to placemaking in my world. And that's the level that I think about it at. So in the almost portfolio construction of an investor's portfolio, their portfolio construction is, where are their assets? What are their assets? And how are they managing them? And all of those things are going to change, and different levers will be pulled at different moments. And that's going to have trickle-down effects to the entire built environment.
Wow, that just blew my mind. A lot of what you said made a lot of sense. But just for clarity, when you say industrial and logistics, what are the types of buildings you're talking about?
So again, terminology that we love to switch around. Industrial, I would say, is the broad strokes highest level of defining an asset sector class. So anything where, and that can range from heavy manufacturing all the way to last mile delivery stations and packaging. Within industrial, there's a lot of different subsectors. So similar, you think about retail. Retail's the broad strokes, and there's shopping malls, there's high street, all of that. And same for residential, there's all of these different groups. Within industrial, historically, it hasn't been popular. Now it's up and coming, and the one that we think has been the most sexy of the industrial asset classes is logistics. And logistics is where that e-commerce stuff comes through. So that's the Amazons, that's the final packaging, that's getting things from where it's manufactured to where it's then shipped out to then go to the end consumer. And that bit's new. And what we're doing in that space is new because that's where AI is coming in a lot more. That's where we didn't have the stock. So there's a lot of new product being developed. We're seeing high density, tall logistics assets versus we don't think about tall industrial sheds. There's been just such a change. It's a subclass of industrial is logistics.
Incredible. And this is so timely because at Concept Culture, we are working on a manufacturing plant in southern India, their entire manufacturing plant, Legacy Corporation. It's exactly the ecosystem you just described because that part of southern India we're talking about, Chennai, Kanchipuram, it's a hive for the top tire manufacturing companies in India. The top 3, top 5, I would say, are all based in that area. And it's exactly what you described because that's what their challenge is. It's a remote area. If you're familiar, those of you familiar with the geography of India, there's a north, south, east, west divide, and they want to attract the top talent from across the country, and that is their challenge. How do we attract the top talent? This is our flagship manufacturing plant. They have a high rate of attrition because people, even the top minds will not stay because the place doesn't add up for them. So everything that you've just said so far is what we're experiencing in our project right now. We're working with the Architects Beyond Design and we was with the stakeholders, and we had a really successful stakeholder engagement workshop down there, and we came back, and that's exactly what you've outlined. And I guess we were so inspired by walking through this manufacturing plant. Like, I had never seen an operation in my life of that scale. They manufacture 17,000 tires a day. And the project I'm working on is to increase the capacity of the master plan to manufacture 30,000 tires a day. So almost double. That is the scale of ambition. That is the level of growth that they want to achieve. So there's so much truth in what you're saying in terms of industries and logistics. So, those of you out there listening and thinking, it's not a sexy place to be, you might want to rethink that.
The returns on an investment in the industrial sector is definitely the juicy stuff that we're after.
Yeah.
I love taking investor clients to see like Amazon distribution centers. And I always get people give me such a hard time. Like, we got to get there first thing in the morning, like 5, 6 a.m. Because seeing an Amazon distribution center in full force, where all of those kind of orders are coming overnight and just seeing them firing through, you're like, whoa, the turnover of this space is incredible. I see why there's the demand. This is not going anywhere. This is a demographic shift. And you couldn't have that kind of turnover in a shopping mall. The amount of stuff that is going in and out the door of those places. So it's just all of a sudden, it's like it all clicks in. Yeah. And it's a sexy sector.
I've definitely come away after my visit to that manufacturing plant much wiser, and now looking at tires very differently. I just had this profound moment of thinking that, my God, the tires make the world go round, literally. Everything, even the Amazon delivery truck and that delivery coming to our home is thanks to the rubber tire that enabled that vehicle to get to your front door. Interesting. Let's keep an eye out for industries and logistics. But going back to the point of the communities, they do hold their little mini towns or villages almost, because the amount of people that work in these large scale buildings. The plan that we're working on specifically, and the feedback that we received from the people who work there was about, we want increasing daylight. We're spending 8 hours here in this closed shell. Yeah. What else can we get? We want access to green spaces. And that particular company, actually, they had a cricket pitch, and so every Friday they get together and they have an internal cricket league and stuff like that. So health and well-being is incredibly important. Community building is incredibly important. And going back to the point of that particular region and attracting people, like people will come with their families, and their families are not working in the plant. What do they do? Yeah. How do they spend their weekends? How do you create the rest? Exactly. And that's all, I guess. Again, that comes down to asset management. Yeah.
And I would caveat the industrial sector with, it makes sense for certain subsectors of it to really think about the placemaking, with AI and with automation, we are also seeing a lot of those sheds not having as many employees. Right? So you think about, the bots that are coming in for some of these distributions, or, even further along that spectrum, we at Principal have been investing in data centers since 2007. Those are basically gigantic computer sheds, but they're highly, digitized spaces that have very few individuals working in them. And so that's always a fine line too of, if you're putting a data center into a neighborhood, you do impact that neighborhood because all of a sudden it's almost like a dead zone. So, and not that that's a bad thing or a good thing. We need data centers. People are listening to this podcast and it's hosted in probably 7 data centers and it's running through fiber networks around the world to get there. It's fundamental to who we are as a society. But there is, things that we're doing that are taking away from community. And if you're putting a data center in the middle of a cultural hub that's going to have nobody going to it or very limited footfall, what does that also do for the surrounding community and place? Then there's nobody going to the local cafes. If it used to be an industrial building and now it's a data center, that does change it. Or as we're adding automation in and reducing the number of people working in places. And I think it's just good to be open and honest of, there's amazing ways to make place, but also how place is changing and how real estate drives place is changing. But I always like to say the flip side of a data center of, you may have some of these dead zones, but we also have so many more like nomadic workers who are all over the world doing stuff because we have data centers.
No, I think we have to be objective here, and you're right. The internet has been a great enabler. It has enabled people to be location independent. One of my priorities when I left traditional practice and set up my own business was I had to be location independent. I had to be remote, so I could be anywhere in the world. As long as I have an internet connection, I can, run my business. So I am one of those digital nomads that you speak of, and I am highly reliant on a strong, stable internet connection wherever I go. And that, as you say, is going to have an impact, and that need for being location independent is only going to increase.
And then again, not to keep tying this in like a change in one sector changes another, but you think about the hotel sector and Airbnbs and the way that we utilize space internationally and how we travel, that's another investable asset class that we invest in on behalf of our investors. What's driving a lot of their decisions to invest into hotels and what types of hotels are they looking at? That totally goes back to part of this. Obviously, we know post-COVID, everybody's chomping at the bit to travel again. And so there's lots of demand for hotels in general. But also this change in how we work post-COVID and the ability to work remotely means that all of a sudden there's different kind of demand for the hotel sector or the hospitality and leisure sector more broadly. And so how we invest in that changes. So it's this constant kind of ebb and flow between the sectors and where we're seeing capital flowing to, and we're still seeing capital flowing to industrial, but, the demographic impact of it, the place impact of it, all of that is so interconnected between these things, which I that's the stuff that gets me excited out of bed in the morning, to be honest.
Amazing, and that's a good segue into my next question. You mentioned that you've lived and worked across several countries and you have a global perspective on real estate. So are there any similar issues or themes that stand out to you that are synonymous across the globe?
Oh my gosh, yes. There's so many. And I mean, this year is a great year of geopolitics. It's been massive. I think 2024 had the most elections in one year than any other year on date.
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, so if you think about how much of the global population voted this year, and with a vote and with political change is capital flow changes. And, we think about where countries are investing, where they're not. Think about the last time we had a Trump presidency, we had onshoring. that had huge impacts on the industrial sectors. All of a sudden, they're wanting to do things themselves. We had different tariffs put in place, tax treaties, agreements and disagreements between countries. So I'd say geopolitical trends right now, there's so many of them, and they are hugely impacting the built environment, whether we recognize them immediately or if we're going to slowly see them coming out in different ways. Demographic changes are huge. We globally have an aging population. There is way more demand for healthcare, senior living homes, how we view those, how we interact with those, what people are looking for in those experiences is changing. Obviously, there's certain countries that's more obvious than not, but overall our population is aging, and how we think about that. The growth of AI and what AI means, again, not to go into it over and over again, but there's so many different ways about how it lets us work office-wise, how it lets us work in terms of industrial, even, how your hotel is run. Do you talk to an individual when you get there, or are you just tapping in and getting a text to your phone with a code? So those are like the really high level, just a couple that I could name that I think, impact the built environment. And then it flows down, and every sector has then more direct, clear implications of it. And then within that, different regions feel it in different ways. But there's definitely fundamentals that we're seeing across the board.
Excellent. And I think you are the first one on this podcast to mention the T word. So, but we can't escape it.
I can say it with my accent, right?
Yeah.
But I am Canadian.
We can't escape it. It is our reality. It's going to be our reality for the next only 4 years, I hope.
For legislation.
For legislation. But I think you're right. We have to be conscious about what's happening around us. So we've talked about how real estate and asset management drives what's happening in the built environment. But is there a way to flip the script and put people first? So how can financial strategies be designed to align with the needs and goals of the community?
Yeah, I think totally. I'll talk about ESG and sustainability. ESG is the acronym we use in my industry. Pretty sure it's pretty standard now. Environmental, social, governance. That has been the growing topic of conversation for the last 10 years from my clients, institutional investors. Thinking about ESG when they're making an investment is part of their investment criteria as they're looking to put their capital to work. And I think even thinking one step further is, who are my clients representing? And I'm really lucky. I get to work with a lot of really public pension plans. So if you're a public pension plan, you're representing regular people's pensions, right? They're firefighters, they're teachers, they're people that want to do good to the world and have done great in their jobs. That's why they get a public pension. And so if you think about it from that perspective, they're huge capitals of money because they've brought it all together. But they still need to have these fundamentals that their underlying investors need to have. And so then this concept of ESG really took off. And I think 5 years ago, more so than now, I'm using 5 years loosely, but it was kind of number one thing. Investors would come and talk to us and they'd be like, okay, what are the ESG credentials of an asset? What does it need from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective? How can you measure it? How can you make sure you're doing that? And then now, they're starting to trust that has come at my industry, the investment management industry, so strongly, and we listened very attentively because we weren't going to get capital from those investors unless we were hitting those requirements. So the way the investment management world has adjusted and shifted is those are now cornerstones of our investment strategies. So when we're looking at a building, we're making sure, is this a sustainable building? Is this, a good building for the tenants in it, all of these different components of it. And those are now baked into our investment process of when we're selecting assets. Not to say that we weren't doing it before, but there's more figures around it. There's more measurement around it. There's great governing bodies that have come up that, are now setting standards that we're all following. Because of that, almost today, it's taken by a lot of investors as if it was their number one priority 5 years ago. They're going, okay, you figured it out. If you're not doing this, we're probably not even having a conversation with you because you're not at the caliber that we need. And I'd say I would caveat the European investment community was definitely one of the major drivers for ESG. The APAC investment community has absolutely followed up on that, and we're seeing more and more of it coming through. A lot of people naturally will think about it in my backyard first. I want to have strong ESG impact, and if I'm representing Canadian teachers, I want the Canadian teachers to benefit first. They don't think like that anymore. It's global, it's expanding. Canadian teachers is a bad example because they always have been great and global thinkers, but I would say there's some misconceptions around ESG where people think I'm just doing charity in this investment and it doesn't impact my, overall return of my strategy. And I think we're breaking that stigma, but we do still hear that of, well, if it's going to impact investment performance, I don't want to make sure it's a green building just for the sake of being green. That's going to cost me money. In reality, having a green building, having a sustainable building is going to make it operationally way more efficient. It's going to then, lower overall costs, which is then going to impact your bottom line. So you're going to have a more profitable building is one very basic example of it. And so having strong ESG credentials also goes hand in glove with having strong investment performance. And I think there's a couple investor groups around the world that we're still in an education process with. And that's the interesting moment right now where, as an investment manager based in Europe, we've heard so much from our European investors. We've changed our fundamentals, but we're now almost educating some of our other clients who haven't thought about it from the same perspective, or we're introducing those clients together to have thoughtful conversations to help people to think about things more holistically. And I think that's really impactful for Pet Place.
I totally agree. And I think that's fundamental music to a lot of people's ears if there's a change in how developments are looked at and there's a more people first approach. So for those listening, are there any innovative financial models or investment strategies that are helping to fund sustainable urban developments that you can think of or you would like to share?
Yeah, I think investment managers around the world, maybe again, just to step back. So when I say investment managers and when I say I do product development, there's lots of different ways that investment managers work, but the bread and butter, the simplest way to think about it is when a client comes and gives me their capital to manage on their behalf, there's two ways that we can manage it. One is if they give me $100 million and they say, okay, go buy me one or two assets and you can manage it. Another way is they can say, here's $100 million, pool this with other like-minded investors, then you can have $1 billion, and then you can go buy a portfolio of assets that will all have equal holdings in, and you're going to invest in a strategy that we all agree on. And that's what I would call a fund strategy, is when we as an investment manager work with our clients to create these strategies that they're all attracted to, that we think there's a really incredible investment rationale behind, and that we can then help them to invest in and manage on their behalf. What we're starting to see, and what gets me excited, coming back to your question, is those investment strategies historically have been real estate as an investment. If we go way back, it's a real estate fund investing in Europe, or it's a real estate fund investing in the UK. Now, when we think about fund strategies, we're digging down. This is a green strategy. This is going to have an environmental impact in whatever it is. This is an affordable housing strategy. This is going to help with the residential issues that are challenged in these areas. Tons of different investment funds out there that are looking to put capital to work that align with what their fund strategy is. So I would say that's an interesting opportunity if somebody is an architect and wanting to work in a certain space. Try to match what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, with where those capital sources are. Because the odds are there could be something out there where it could be a really synergistic opportunity. And instead of fighting to find capital, it's like partnering with capital and figuring out what's driving their decision making, what's driving those fund strategies, and then go in and work alongside them. I think that's the most exciting thing to do, and that's what connects me to the built environment and me to this podcast, hopefully, is those partnerships that I get to help implement on the day-to-day.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's what it's all about. Like, I sit in so many conferences, as you probably do, and everyone's sitting in the room. It's like, oh, we have a housing crisis, we have a climate crisis, but we don't have the money, or there is money, but we don't know how to tap it. You've just outlined an intelligent way in how to do that. And so then I guess on the flip side is, why isn't it happening?
It is happening.
Okay.
I think it's just knowing.
But why do we have a housing crisis in the UK? Okay, that's a difficult question. That's a difficult question. That is a loaded question. I agree. But you talked about affordable housing, and everyone, it's such a hot topic now. It's a dividing topic, depending on who you're talking to. But I guess we want to get the right people in the room, and how do we address this?
Yeah, and I think affordable housing is a really interesting topic, because for so long that's been a problem for the public world to deal with, right? You think, but that's for government to solve, or things like that. I work in the private market. I get to play in a different way without the same impact of government. I was lucky enough to work on the launch of an affordable housing fund in 2018, focused on the UK. That was getting investor capital from UK big pension plans, but also wider investors who saw the demand for it. And then it was working in partnership with registered providers in the UK to help bring assets and, beds to market, where, part of our affordable housing challenge that we have is, the supply demand imbalance and what that means. And, all of a sudden we're having those conversations with private capital backing, new home starts, in parallel with registered providers who are helping making sure the right people get the right access. That's one very specific format that it can take. But I think it's a really interesting one, and one that we're going to see more and more of, because no longer are these public issues or private issues. I think what we're seeing is that they're challenges, but they're opportunities. And again, not to sound super capitalist and everything is bottom line focused, but you can have a really strong impact, but also make a profit and make a good investment. And that's the balance where our investors get interested, because you want to do both. You want to make a great investment, and in real estate, you want to invest in residential because the fundamentals make a ton of sense right now. And in investing in residential, you're helping add stock to the market, which, whether it's affordable stock or regular stock or whatever it is going to change the supply and demand imbalances, which at some point in the grand scheme of things does impact affordability. So depending on how you want to slice it and go into an affordable only product and really think about it, yeah, your returns might be slightly lower. Or if you want to think about a residential investment, but thinking about the impact you have on the wide residential market, that's going to have an impact too. It's just maybe not as clear. And I think that partnership and realizing the role of the private market is here to stay, and it's going to get bigger and bigger. And so collaborating, partnering, rather than seeing it as taboo or the worst thing in the world to have a private developer, thinking of the flip side and the positive side, I always try to do, because otherwise it's too easy to do doom and gloom all the time.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you. I think we do need a bit more positivity. There's just too many bad headlines out there, and we do need some positivity. And like you said, partnership and collaboration, and not seeing developers and the private sector as the bad guys, but looking at ways of how to work together with them and just along the way, and impact the greater good, and solve issues like housing, which is a fundamental need for all of us. Wow, so we've talked about ESG, we've talked about asset management, we've talked about manufacturing, logistics, industrial. My mind is just buzzing right now. But this podcast is also about storytelling.
Yes.
So let's talk about storytelling now. In your world, asset management and asset management, what are the key factors to consider when telling the story about a place? And are there any stories that have stood out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say in my role as a product development team member, and that being my focus, I think of myself as a storyteller all the time, because inputs from my research team telling me what the fundamentals are, the demographic changes, what's driving shifts in our world. I then talk to our investment teams, and they give me real life examples of deals and transactions that fit with a thesis that we have based on those demographics and based on opportunity. And I start to blend these things together to tell the story to our client base and to our prospective client base. Because Some investors, you can go in and say, you're going to give me money and I'm going to give you 10% back extra, whatever, that's going to be enough. But to be honest, that barely happens. I wish that was all I had to say. The reality is that institutional investors are get a knock on their door more than every day, every hour, every 20 minutes with some investment idea, some concept. And why is somebody going to pick my concept over their deal that maybe has very similar numbers? And that's where the storytelling really comes into play. Because when you're making an investment in real estate, everybody who works in the built environment, it's not a stocks and bond trade. You don't buy it one day and sell the next day. You're stuck with it for a chunk of time because the fastest real estate transaction is still like 6 or 9 months, if you're thinking about it at scale. And so if you're investing into real estate, there's a time horizon you're thinking about. You want to make sure that you believe it, not just today, but in 5 years, you're going to still have conviction in that decision that you made. And so much of that is the story that you tell backed with the numbers that support it. And so I would say that I'm constantly a storyteller, and the way that I tell those stories is different than maybe an architect would tell the story of how somebody goes through their space and experiences it. But I just is a similar thing, but just kind of elevated up a level. So if I'm talking about data centers and we're talking about the first iPhone in the early 2000s to today, where, we've probably got 6 on the table here, how we use it, how we've seen that shift over time, and where we see technology going, where we see AI going, where we see the cloud use going, where everybody's experienced personally, migration of your files from your computer to the cloud. And for some 6-month period, you thought you were going crazy because you couldn't find them. And that's something that is a tangible story that actually backs up why you should maybe invest in a data center, because that's not going anywhere. The demand is shifting fundamentally, and things like supply and demand are always going to be those major drivers when investors think about fundamentals to invest in an asset class, an asset type, anything that they're putting their money to work at. So that's my very long-winded way of telling you a story about my file migration that actually makes me really excited about data center investing.
Yeah. But I love how you made that connection, and to your point, the way you would tell stories from an investment perspective is different to where a designer will tell stories about how the person's navigating through their space, but at the heart of it, stories are fundamentally about the audience and the people that they're going to impact. Amazing. So, Franny, you are president of the LAI London chapter. Can you tell us a little bit about what the LAI is, what this acronym stands for?
Absolutely. LAI is a global organization. It stands for Lambda Alpha International, which does sound like a fraternity, but it is not. It is. It actually translates into a land economic society. So it's a very interesting group, an organization that brings together individuals that work within the built environment. And so much of what we've been talking about today is very similar to how we have these conversations within LAI and what LAI is all about. It's bringing together, the architects, the urban planners, the designers, the placemakers, all with those individuals who work all the way through that land economics world up to kind of the area that I sit at, which is the finance and the numbers and the investment. There's legal perspectives and there's so many people that work in a way that touch onto our built environment. And it is a collaborative group of individuals that come together to share best ideas, challenges, fears often, together. And so in London, we have one of the chapters of LAI. I think there's a couple hundred chapters around the world in major cities. And we're a great group. You're a member. And it's a really fascinating group of people where I think we have really thoughtful, productive conversations with really intelligent individuals.
Excellent. And for those listening, how could they get involved?
If you would like to learn more about LAI in London, you can email hello@lailondon.org.
That's right. As you were saying, I was like, I think she's got it right.
Thank you.
All right, so we're now in the final section of our conversation. At this point, I'd like to do some future gazing with you. What is your vision of the built environment? What will the world look like, say, 10, 20 years from now? Or what is the world you want to see?
Yeah, I think touched on geopolitics earlier. I think flow and international traffic and collaboration, migration, change is something that I'm excited about. As much as there's challenges that come with it, I love it. I think that's probably what brings us together, is wanting to move around the world and wanting to see the world and collaborate with people. And so for me, the future of place is utilizing that evolutionary change in how we think about the global economy. So we don't think about place quite as much as my immediate neighborhood or my immediate city, and more in a global sense, while still having space to make those memories and to have those emotional times and people and all of that. And there's this balance between the two, and I sound like I'm probably a hippy-dippy person right now, but I think there's some space in the middle, and that's what I'm looking forward to, and I think that's where we're going as a world.
Wow, I do hope that vision comes through. Like you say, me, definitely travel much. I want to travel more. I want to, see as much as I can, do as much as I can, as physically and humanly possible, but within, in a responsible way, in a climate conscious and socially responsible way. So what's next for you, Franny?
Well, next is I think we're going to the pub after this. Realistically.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to see what's next. I really live by the never say never motto. I'm always excited about new opportunities. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. Monotony is not for me. So challenges, excitement, new horizons are what I hope is what's next, because that's what I'm searching for here, there, and everywhere.
Oh my God! And I hope you will find those new horizons. I'm certain you will. You're a go-getter, Franny. Yeah. Like you've manifested, visualized it, and it will come to you. So that brings us to the end of the more formal part of our conversation. Okay. Now we have our final segment. Okay, it's a fun segment. Okay, it's called Know Your Neighborhood.
No, I think I'm gonna do
No. It's just a way to share a few snippets about your selected neighborhood, and I'll ask you 3 quick-fire questions, and they're facts, or they may not be. So for those listening, Franny's chosen neighborhood is the lovely West Hampstead.
It is.
All right, are you ready, Franny?
I'm ready.
All right, let's go. Question number 1: West Hampstead was previously known as West End.
No. No way.
That is wrong. It was true. So yes, it's true. From as early as the start of the 16th century until the railway arrived at the end of the 18th century, West Hampstead was known as West End. When the railway station on West End Lane was built, it was named West Hampstead to avoid confusion with the other West End in central London's theatre district. Oh, I thought you might have got this one.
Never mind. But I'm going to tell everybody that I live in the West End.
And the 16th century. Yeah. Okay. All right. So question number 2.
Okay.
West Hampstead has always been a bustling suburb.
I would wonder, because there's 3 different train lines that run through there, that it's always been busy, but I don't know if I would call it like bustling as in a suburban area.
True or false?
False.
All right, that's correct. You're right. The area changed from a rural village to a suburb with the arrival of the railways in the mid-19th century. And the railways led to farmland and parkland being converted into just housing estates. All right, this next one should be a bit more interesting. So the fight for West End Green was a campaign to prevent West End Green from being turned into a shopping mall and to keep it as a public park. Is that true or false?
I'm sure that's true.
Oh, okay, that's actually false. But I think, but it's not, but not from the way you think it. This is the last question is always a trick question. So it was more about like they wanted to protect the Western Green, but it was not the proposal from there. It was not to turn it into a shopping mall, but it was more to turn it into housing or commercial property. So that was a trick question.
Okay.
But anyway, so 1 of 3. That's not bad. But these were tough questions. Even when I was reading them, I was like, oh, that doesn't sound right. Because for me as well, when like you said, Hampstead is the pretty Hampstead that we know from.
Yeah.
From
I'm always happy
movies.
when people think I live in Hampstead. I'll take that.
Yeah. But this has been so much fun, Franny. I have learned a lot. I think my brain is absolutely buzzing, and you're right. It's time to go to the pub and unpack everything that we've talked about. So all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and joining me on this podcast to talk about place.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Oh, lovely to see you and see you soon.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to join the conversation on social media with the hashtag #TalkingPlace. I would also love for you to leave our podcast a review and subscribe to all our podcast and YouTube channels so you don't miss an episode. There is so much more to explore when it comes to creating good places, and I'm excited to do a deep dive into other topics with you in our next episode. I'm Tanisha Raffiuddin, and it's been my pleasure to be your podcast host. Thank you for listening. See you again next time, where we'll continue talking place.